Hello, thank you for joining me as I read some more of my book, Revelation. Jeanette was so excited to be picking up her sister from the train station. Sandra has been on a trip to Liverpool with the Banshee Theatre Company. Jeanette could barely contain her excitement as she told her sister everything she knew about Garrison Blackwood. He was 26 years old, 6 feet tall, with thick black hair and brown eyes. Jeanette said that the only thing she could find that was a fault in him was the fact that he relied more on his strength than his intelligence. She thought it was perfect. Jeanette glowed as she spoke about him. Sandra smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. Jeanette continued to tell her sister about her new beau and that her heart melts when she looks into his eyes, and she couldn't understand how she could feel this way about someone she'd only known for a few short weeks. But when they were apart, she could only think about how much she wanted to be with him. Sandra told Jeanette that it sounded like she was in love and asked when she was going to get to meet him. Jeanette excitedly replied, "Tonight. I'm going to have dinner at his home on Hampstead Lane. He wants me to meet his father." Sandra hugged her sister and remembered that Jeanette had said that Garrison had come into the bookstore, and she asked her why. She told her about him wanting an old book for his father's birthday gift. Sandra asked what the name of the book was called. Jeanette replied, "Akashi." Sandra was now very interested in why Garrison's father would need that book. She needed to find out everything she could about him and his father, because only someone involved in the dark arts would want or need this book. Sandra barely had enough time to put away her bags when Garrison arrived to pick up Jeanette for dinner. She watched the way that he never took his eyes off her sister. He seemed very sweet, and Jeanette was right about how handsome he was. Sandra could not read his thoughts, but that did not alarm her. She had met a few men and women that she couldn't read. Sandra was told that even the strongest witches and warlocks couldn't do everything. She was very happy for her sister. He seemed to be madly in love with Jeanette, and it didn't hurt that his family was very wealthy either. Garrison was very polite and took Sandra's gloved hand and bowed in a very courteous manner, and then he shook hands with Uncle Center. He handed Jeanette a beautiful bouquet of flowers. She smelled them and handed them to her sister as she thanked Garrison and told him that the ones that he gave her yesterday were still lovely. He told her they were not as lovely as she was, and looked at her like a child in awe of the moon. "We should be going. Father will be home soon, and our chef is fixing roast duck in honor of my beautiful lady," Garrison gushed. They all walked out onto the front porch, and Garrison helped Jeanette up into the carriage. "Remember to be home before 11, Jeanette," Sandra reminded them. Sandra is now a little worried that she could not read Garrison. She felt that something was not right. But Jeanette is almost 17, old enough to make her own choices for her life. Jeanette was very excited to meet Garrison's family. She could not remember the last time that she was so happy. As they arrived at Blackwood Manor, Jeanette told Garrison what a lovely place as she looked out of the carriage window. Garrison smiled and said thank you. It had been in their family for many years. As the carriage reached the front entry, Dimitri, the doorman, a short, bald man with a wispy mustache and dressed in a uniform, is there to greet them and help Jeanette out of the carriage. Garrison took her hand, and they walked up the steps to enter the mansion. Jeanette was impressed by the beauty of the foyer and the wood framing on the staircase. The marble floors were polished into a high shine. She looked up to see a chandelier that was massive. It seemed to fill the whole ceiling as it hung down to the first curve of the staircase. Dimitri told them that Alexander was not home yet, but he should be arriving very soon. "Come, Jeanette, let's go to the study. We will wait for him there." They held hands as they walked down the hall. He opened the heavy doors to the study, to a wealth of old artifacts. Jeanette responded as she rushed into the room. "Wow, look at all these beautiful things." "Yes, these are some of the things Father has collected through the years," Garrison replied as he watched her react with delight. Jeanette walked around the room admiring the collections. She was drawn to a suit of armor that stood near the massive fireplace. "This is beautiful," Jeanette said as she slowly ran her hand across the chest plate. "It is magnificent, isn't it? My father loves the medieval period. He had to travel extensively to find that suit of armor, as it was sold off in pieces," explained Garrison. "Well, it's just breathtaking, I have to say. I love that period too," Jeanette replied. "Jeanette, sit with me," Garrison asked. She turned toward Garrison, and he gently took her hand and walked her over to the settee that sat in front of the fireplace. The settee is covered in a beautiful tapestry with gold fringe and large curved arms. The oriental rug it rests on is adorned with many flowers and swirls, and is thick under her feet. "The room is just beautiful," she thought to herself. He sat her down and asked if she would like some wine. She nodded yes. He poured them each a glass. He sat down beside her and handed her a glass of wine. They sat and sipped their wine for a moment. Then he looked into her eyes and said, "I love you, and I want us to be together forever, Jeanette." He took the glass from her hand and placed both of their glasses down on the table. He gently grabbed her shoulders and pulled her close to him and kissed her deeply, passionately. Jeanette felt her whole body come alive. This is how she imagined it would be. She thought to herself, "He is so wonderful, and he loves me." For a moment she looked in his eyes and thought, "Yes, I want to be with him forever." Just then he pulled her even closer to him and kissed her harder, and with more passion than she could ever have dreamed. It was almost as if he knew what she was thinking. His hands moved from her shoulders to her neck and then to her hair. She could feel him taking the pins out of her hair and loosening her bun, and he let her hair fall down over her shoulders. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, Jeanette. You are just as beautiful on the inside as you are on the outside," Garrison sighed. "You should always wear your hair down like this," as he ran his fingers through her soft curls. He grabbed the back of her head and pulled her to him as he kissed her neck. Jeanette is now burning as hot as fire. She has never felt such desire for a man, any man. Her hands reached out and touched his chest and then slowly slid them around to his back. She could feel his muscles and how firm and strong he was. "He feels so good in my arms," she thought to herself. She wanted to give herself to him, and she moaned out yes softly after every kiss. Garrison was trying hard to restrain himself. He could feel her heart beating faster as he touched and caressed her soft skin. He wanted her so badly to be his forever. He wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly as he said, "Jeanette, I know you feel as I do. Do you want to be with me forever?" "Yes, oh yes," she said, "forever." "Oh, Jeanette," he said softly as he kissed her neck down to the curve where her neck meets her shoulder. He could hear her heart beating and her blood coursing through her veins as he drank in her scent. He softly said, "Jeanette, I need to show you who I really am." "I know who you really are, Garrison," Jeanette moaned out, "and I love who you are." "Then you will accept me and be my gift and accept my gift to you and come here to live with me at Blackwood Manor?" Garrison begged. "Oh yes, Garrison," she whispered in his ear. She could hardly believe how perfect this night was, and that they would soon marry and be together forever. He kissed her neck and moved his lips across her skin until he reached the middle of her shoulder as she trembled and moaned. She dug her fingers into his back. His eyes changed to a deep amber, and he opened his mouth as his teeth take a different shape. They grew long and sharp. Jeanette is unaware of Garrison's change, as she herself is changing. Her heart is beating fast and her body is trembling. She's immersed in kisses and his touch. Never has she felt like this. Garrison sunk his teeth in her neck, and Jeanette cringed and tried to pull away from the pain. She pushed on his chest as hard as she could. He released his hold on her. She grabbed her neck and screamed, "What are you doing? That hurts!" As she turns and sees him, his eyes are as bright as fire, and his teeth as sharp as daggers. His skin is pale, almost blue. She pushed away from him and fell backward onto the floor and scooted away on her backside while she yelled, "Why do you look like that?" He stood up and reached out for her. "I want you to be with me forever, Jeanette." "No, no, I cannot," she cried. "Yes, you can. I felt your heart, and it begs for me." As he walked toward her, Jeanette was terrified and was unable to get up and frozen in fear. She kicked her legs, but they felt as heavy as lead. "No, go away, please go away," Jeanette cried out. Then, with a burst of strength, she kicked her feet on the floor so hard that it shoved her back. She slammed into the legs of the suit of armor that stood next to the fireplace. He grabbed her foot and pulled her to him as she screamed, "Please, no, don't do this." She grabbed the shield that had fallen on the floor next to her and threw it at him. He knocked it away as she begged, "Jeanette, please let me show you my world so we can be together forever. You will see how happy we can be." "No, please, I don't want this," she screamed as she kicked herself away from him. He bent down and grabbed her around the waist and began to pick her up. She grabbed the small sword from the floor and stabbed blindly at him. She heard him gasp. She struggled to her feet and began to run. Garrison called out her name. She stopped and turned to see him holding his chest, where the silver sword was now protruding. He reached out for her as he fell to his knees and then to the floor. She slowly walked toward him with her hand out as if to somehow she could take his hand and make this all go away. She knelt beside him as he softly whispered to her, "I love you, Jeanette." Crying, she reached out and touched his face. "Garrison, my love, I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." She watched him change back to his human form, and then he began to waste away, first to bones and then to dust. She couldn't believe her eyes and started to cry harder as she shouted, "Oh God, please help me. What have I done?" She stood up and backed away. Her eyes were blurred by tears as she made her way from the study to the foyer. Jeanette could feel the warm blood running down the curve of her neck as she ran. Her heart pounded in her chest as she ran out the front door of the mansion. Everything seemed to be going by in slow motion. She felt the cool night air blow against her face as she stepped out onto the veranda. Her feet were moving fast, faster than her mind could follow. She gave out a sigh of relief as she ran past the carriage and could see the end of the drive. She heard what sounded like large hounds barking and snarling, running up behind her. She wondered why she wasn't more afraid. One of the hounds was about a foot from her, snapping and growling, but just as Jeanette felt it would attack, the hound just stopped. Seeming confused, it turned around and walked away. As she was looking back toward the mansion, she tripped on the edge of the cobblestone drive and fell, catching her dress in some briars and cutting herself on the thorns in the bushes. Her eyes were starting to swell from crying. She could hardly see. Her lungs felt as though they were going to explode as she ran down the road. Jeanette made it to the bridge at the edge of town and fell to her knees again, crying. She felt like she'd been running for hours by the time she reached Twin Road. As she ran across Sumter Street, she was knocked down by a passing carriage. She spun around on the ground to keep from being hit by another. Just then, a hand reached down and grabbed Jeanette by the arm and pulled her up. She looked up and saw Raphael Enzo. He works with Sandra at the Banshee Theater Company. He is a very large man of Italian descent. Unbeknownst to Jeanette, he is also a white warlock. He is a member of the Banshee Order. Jeanette began to cry as she hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Raphael." "You are safe now, Jeanette. Do you need a doctor?" Raphael asked. "No, I just want to go home," Jeanette replied as she clung to his arm. "My carriage is right over there. Come on," Raphael said as he pointed across the street. He turned back to her just as she passed out. He caught her before she hit the ground. He picked her up and carried her to his carriage. Thank you for letting me read this part of my book. I hope you'll join me next week.